Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Duggar. I'm the Chief Executive of UK Music, which is the umbrella organisation representing all the different parts of the music industry. The MPA are one of our members and sit on our board. And I want to thank the MPA, first of all, for inviting us all along to talk about this really important subject, music and education. And also to pay tribute to the MPA, to the work that Jackie has done and Paul, and before that, Jane Dybel as well. And really this whole area of music and education and its importance and the campaigning that we've done, the roundtables with ministers, the MPA really have driven so much of that work. I know how important it is to their members, and Jackie and Paul in particular have really driven this forward to make sure that all of us at UK Music are working really, really hard on what is a really, really important agenda for us. I just want to, before I introduce the panel, just give a few stats really to give an indication of the worries that many of us have about the current state of music in education, and that is 50% of children at fee-paying independent schools receive sustained music tuition, whilst the figure for state schools is only 15%. Now, why does that matter? Because 93% of kids go to state schools, to non-fee-paying schools. Kevin Brenner, I'll introduce shortly, coined the phrase that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not, and I think that's really, really key. 17% of music creators were educated at fee-paying schools, compared with obviously less than 7% across the population as a whole. Now, we think that's important, not just because we think every kid from every background should have access to music, but just being selfish as an industry, what it means is that we are drawing water from a well that's getting smaller and smaller. We might not see that necessarily today, but I'm certain that we will see the negative outcomes of that in the coming years ahead. So it's really something that we've got to focus on, and we're going to keep driving this in terms of getting the changes that we want to see from government. And of course, it's also part of a wider problem as well, which is, if you come from a background where your parents have got plenty of money, you may go to a fee-paying school, you may not, but, you're much more likely that your parents can afford tuition, can afford instruments, you've got a house where there are instruments there, but also later on as you access music and perhaps try a career in music, you've got access to the bank of mum and dad as well. And of course, increasingly, we're seeing that in the industry right the way through. So there's a huge divide opening up, and we really have got to do something really urgently about that. We've got a fantastic panel for you, different shapes and sizes and backgrounds, different perspectives from across the music scene and also politics as well. So we've got Deborah King, who is the Chief Executive of the Manchester-based music charity Brighter Sound, which is supporting young and emerging musicians. Does a fantastic job. We've got Sharon Jagdev Powell, musician, deputy head of the Leicestershire Music Service, lead partner in the Music Hub in Leicestershire, and former music teacher as well. Indeed, yeah. We've also got Shingi, who was lead singer of the Noisettes, now a solo artist, songwriter. She has debut solo EP out at the moment, so as soon as this is over, before you get tucking into the drinks, everyone's got to get on Spotify and everything else and get the streaming numbers up. It's called Ancient Futures. It was out last Friday. She's got to dash immediately after this to do a radio interview to plug the new record, which is fantastic. I read that Rolling Stone magazine described, it said, Shingi's a living, breathing manifestation of the rock and roll spirit. I mean, how cool is that? No one has ever said that about Paul Clements. They said she has a voice that is in equal parts Iggy Pop and Billie Holiday. I thought, that's fucking brilliant. And talking of the living, breathing manifestation of the rock and roll spirit, we also have Kevin Brennan, who is a musician by night, and by daytime is the Labour MP for Cardiff West. He's the shadow minister for culture. In the previous Labour government, Kevin was a minister in the Department of Education, as is now. And I think without flattering him too much, Kevin, I think, is probably music's biggest and most long-standing supporter in the whole of Parliament, and he has done so much for creators and for our industry over so many years. So I'm really, really grateful that Kevin is giving up his time to be with us today. We're going to have some introductory remarks from the panelists. Then I'll throw a few questions. One of the best things about not being a politician anymore, I get to ask questions rather than answer them, which is it's definitely a lot easier. So we're going to do some questions, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor, and we're going to finish prompt at 5:15. So, Deborah, tell us all about how it's going in Manchester.
It's going really well in Manchester. Hello, everyone. And thank you, Michael. And it's really great to be on this panel, and thank you to the MPA as well for the opportunity. I think it's going well, and it's going well across the north. I think our work in particular kind of focuses on paving the way for music makers, which we like to think of the future. So we kind of work really hard to celebrate diversity, and we're committed to continue to build the momentum for change. And in response to your comments, there are some worrying trends, and I think at Brighter Sound we kind of recognise and also proactively challenge some of the obstacles along current music pathways. And those obstacles often relate to geography, ethnicity, gender and socioeconomics. And we know, as Michael was saying, that those obstacles really unequivocally exclude some of our most promising and diverse and creative artists and industry professionals. It's our 20th birthday next year, which is really exciting. So we've been going for 20 years. And I think over those 20 years, we've been really supported by Youth Music, who've kind of worked with us as a partner, really, to become that musical inclusion expert across the Northwest and more broadly across the North. And we work with a lot of music education hubs to kind of support and work with them to develop a more kind of inclusive approach to music making. And as we know, that's kind of that kind of I suppose scope of music education hub work is very varied. There are some hubs who are doing fantastic work, and there are some hubs who still need to kind of develop their practice. I think the good thing about working with Youth Music is that they've really kind of specialised as well in and spearheaded research. For example, like the Exchanging Notes report that's been recently released, which really gives, I think, the practice an informed position to work from and helps us to kind of develop our programmes. We also work with young and emerging musicians, and we are really committed to that equality across the industry. And particularly, we run a programme called Both Sides Now, which is around gender equality, and that's right across the north. And we do a lot of programmes of work with those 4 cities, and also we've been working with Churanga to develop an education resource for children and young people, which kind of shows positive role models of women in the music industry. And I guess for us, it's the positive role models, it's the access to opportunities, it's the kind of oxygen that we hope that we work in partnership to kind of breathe into those unheard voices, those underground communities of musicians, those young people really that do want a chance to do something. They are interested in music. And for a lot of young people, I think the majority of young people, music is an everyday part of their lives. I know my daughter, she listens to it first thing in the morning, she listens to it last thing at night, and at different points during the day. She's completely kind of she listens to loads of different music. And I guess the biggest thing for us, and that is really common across lots of young people, as I'm sure we all know in this room. And I think for me, what we really need at the moment, and it's coming together, and we were just talking earlier on how it really does feel like it's coming together, but is this kind of process of radical reform to make our learning offer, whether it's the music curriculum, whether it's our external learning offer, out of school offer, really relatable and really relevant to those children and young people that we kind of want to reach out to. And certainly even more so to those children and young people that we haven't reached out to yet. So I'm going to end on that note.
Well, thank you very much. And before I bring in Sharon, one of the other stats that I didn't use has been there's a 30% decline in the number of students doing A-level music. Now, obviously that's just one indication. It's about formal academic participation in music. There's a broader problem out there, I think, in terms of access to music for kids, whether it's going right back down to those early years and in primary school. But it is an important measure, because if we allow music to wither and die on the curriculum, then why would schools have music teachers or music rooms? And that might be the place where kids go at lunchtime, they form bands, they're self-taught musicians and all that kind of stuff as well. So there is a real worry about what's happening in lots of our schools. So I don't know if that's something you can draw on, and we welcome listening to your broader points as well. So Sharon, please.
Thank you very much. Hello there, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be here this afternoon, and thank you for inviting me. My experience in music education, if I could share a little bit with you. I've been involved in music education for 23 years in total. Prior to my current position, I was a music teacher in both London and Nottingham. So I've been at the chalk face and seen those students and supported those students, and it's very much my passion to be part of that musical journey with the children that I've taught. I've also been involved in Musical Futures, which is now a global movement, which led to, it's devised by teachers for teachers, to kickstart music education, to get children involved and engaged from all walks of life, to get them involved in music, and tapping into the work that goes on in schools, but also outside of schools, which often we don't talk about, all the music that goes on in the community, all the music that goes on with the bedroom producers, with their iPads and things like that. So that was a really important aspect of my work. My current position is Deputy Head of Leicestershire Music Service. Now, Leicestershire Music Service is the lead partner, as Michael said, for Leicestershire Music Hub, and there are 120 music hubs across the country. They're all area centred. So my music hub covers Leicester and Leicestershire, and we look after about 400 schools in our community, and we're funded by the Arts Council, and we provide as many opportunities for our children from early years up to post-16. So very much involved in ensuring that music education can we have access to the many or all rather than the few. We do provide high quality ensembles, but we're very keen on creating progression routes for children. So the bedroom producers, so there's somewhere for them to go, there's some recognition of their talent, so they have the opportunity to flourish in music education. So that's where I'm coming from, really. I think my experience as a teacher, I've seen the bands that rehearse, as you mentioned, the bands that rehearse every morning and every afternoon, and there is a whole wealth of talent there. Children love music, children want to be involved in music, and I think it's our job to support them and find a way to tap into that talent and provide the support that we're all here today to do.
Well, thank you very much for that. And one thing that we've worked closely with the MPA on at UK Music about the music hubs is they're the government's chosen delivery mechanism, and that's not going to change anytime soon. But our experience, kind of anecdotally, and some of the work that's out there is they're a bit patchy. Some are working better than others, and we've said there should be an independent review of the music hubs to kind of see why is it that some are stronger than others, what is the reasons, have some got better local networks, is it being close to local authorities, or is actually that a bad thing? Are the bigger ones doing better than some of the smaller ones? We really don't know the answers to quite basic questions, and given that it's the government's chosen delivery mechanism, we've asked for that review, and for the review to be independent of the Arts Council as well. We obviously love the Arts Council. You'll have seen my public comments over the years about how much we love the Arts Council, but you know, we're talking about music and education. Sometimes, if be gentle criticism, the Arts Council has a habit of marking their own homework and kind of giving themselves 11 out of 10, which is not great. So we think let's have an independent review so we can, you know, build on some of the good practice that is out there. Which leads me on to Kevin Brennan, the Shadow Culture Minister, and Labour win the election. It could be a snap election after a new Prime Minister in the spring, and you could find yourself walking into the DCMS as a minister. So having spent several years saying, the government is rubbish, you'll then have to say, well, what are you going to do about it? And that's your question today, Kevin.
Well, thank you, Michael.
I tell you, it's much easier asking questions.
It certainly is. Well, that is true. I mean, first of all, can I just apologise for politics in this country at the moment? But what Michael's correct about is there's a great deal of uncertainty about what could happen over the next few months or few weeks, over the next couple of years or so. So we have to be prepared for anything to happen. And in relation to this subject, my view about it is that there is an issue. There's a real problem that has got worse over the last decade, and it does relate to decisions that have been taken in central government about creative subjects, including music in schools, and also in relation to things that we were just talking about now, the music hubs and the way they've been organised. And ultimately, a philosophical decision was taken by the government after 2010 that it wanted to focus on certain core subjects in state schools and didn't care too much about the impact that that had on creative subjects like music and drama and the arts and so on. Now, my starting point is very different to that. I think that creativity in and of itself is a good thing. And in and of itself is something that should be nurtured and encouraged in our education system. And that you can't have a successful education system unless it produces a well-rounded education. So yes, it's important that children should do well in their maths and their literacy and their English and in science and all those subjects as well. But it is not possible to have a well-rounded education if you are not encouraging and nurturing the creative side of people. And in fact, creativity is important in science, and it's important in all areas of life if you're going to be successful in your career. And what annoys and frustrates me about that approach is that that's the approach that the government has taken towards education in the state sector, and it's been driven by accountability measures like the EBAC, the English Baccalaureate so-called, something the government made up in order to try and encourage and pressurize schools into focusing more on certain core subjects and less on subjects like music. That's happened in the state sector, whilst, as Michael pointed out, in the private sector, the 7% sector where children go to school, quite the opposite has happened. They have the best drama studios, the best musical departments, the best facilities available. And it's no coincidence, I think, that as a result of that, we've seen through the pipeline in recent years a greater dominance, to be perfectly frank, both in the music industry and in things like numbers of people who win Oscars and so on, of people coming from private education. And for all the reasons Michael said, that's not a good thing in the long term. We need to be making sure that we are drawing from the whole of the talent that the well of talent that's available within the country, for the very reason that talent is everywhere and is spread evenly across the country. And my view is, as policymakers, it should be our job to spread that opportunity to every area of the country. So creativity is good in itself. Music education is good of itself. Before we even talk about the industry and the pipeline, it's good for you, it's good for the soul, it's good for a well-rounded education. Goodness knows, with all the stats about mental health and so on, why we need to have creative outlets for children and young people in our education system. And so I think at the root of all of this, how do you turn things around? Obviously, it requires investment as ever, and we could talk about money and investment in education, but it isn't just that. It also requires a reset of mindset about creative subjects and about music education. And I think one of the quickest ways with regard to schools for that to happen is the inspection regime that we have for our schools. We have an inspection regime currently that means you can be rated an outstanding school on your exam results around that narrow base of subjects. And if you are rated an outstanding school, you don't even get to be inspected for many, many years thereafter. So the government will continually say, we've got more outstanding schools than ever, but it won't tell you they haven't been inspected for the last 7 years. So they may no longer be outstanding. But my view is that it should not be possible for a school to achieve an outstanding rating by Ofsted unless it has an outstanding creative offer. And that would be central to what we do, as well as the funding things like a creative pupil premium and so on, in order to encourage more music education.
Well, thank you, Kevin, and I think that echoes lots of the concerns that that we've had working with the MPA and UK Music, which is there's the kind of economic imperative, if you like, which is the music industry contributes £4.5 billion to the economy, but our growth, our exports, much, much faster than other parts of the economy. Creative industries contribute over £100 billion now to the economy, and with automation, we actually need our kids to be more creative, not less. So there's a strong economic imperative, but as you also said, there's a broader education argument as well, which is all the evidence suggests that children who are engaged in their education through music and similarly through drama and sport, they do better at the core subjects, they do better at their maths and English. So this is really dumb education policy as well. So thank you for your comments there. I'm going to bring Shingi in now to perhaps reflect on the successful career that you've had and continue to have, and perhaps reflect on, you know, the opportunities that you enjoyed and whether you think those opportunities are there for kids coming through and for emerging artists of the future. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. It's really such an honour to be here, guys. Yeah, it means a lot. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal experiences in terms of access to music education and kind of where I am now. There was quite a lack of funding in the state primary school that I went to, or actually in secondary, so I took music lessons outside. I also play bass in the noisettes, so I started taking guitar lessons, and it was actually thanks to organisations such as the MIDI Music Company in Deptford, which is run by Wazzy Brewster, who's a bit of a mentor to me actually, and organisations such as Second Wave, which is also in Deptford. They both have to scramble a lot for funding, lots of challenges there. But they gave me such a really important grounding in access to music, and just there was a social place that I could just go and felt like I could belong and develop as a creative person. I'm now an ambassador for the MIDI Music Company, along with other amazing artists such as Shaka Khan and Jazzy B. Yeah, so I experienced a lot of amazing success with my band, the Noisettes. Yes, there was a lot of hard work. We were signed to a major label. We've sold out tours. We've been, and in terms of publishing, we've been sort of fully recouped since 2015. And yeah, we still get to have a lot of regular healthy sync opportunities. The downsides, however, have been that I think my lack of formal education in the music business, like in the music industry, shall I say, like many artists, is something I think that can be easily exploited, and I think it would be nice to sort of know that we're going in a much more positive direction on that side. Yeah, I kind of feel like despite the Noisettes' success, I found it really challenging getting my solo project supported and funded and getting off the ground. I actually had to self-fund despite still not getting much actually support from our publishers. But I'm not going to obviously sort of say any names or anything. But yeah, I think it's not just about educating music creators. I think it's important to also educate the industry, and I think that diversity is another huge buzzword, but we've still got quite far to go. It kind of felt like when I was trying to get deals to support my solo work, it just felt like there was a bit of a sort of subtle quota that was maybe subconscious. It kind of felt like there was only room for a few people of colour at a time and a few women at a time on certain labels, and that includes, you know, publishing companies, PR companies. I was told by one company that they already had someone similar. I've got a twin sister, and we're not even similar. So yeah, that was a bit like, I guess you were just gonna have to sort of read between the lines on that one. But yeah, it really hurt, and there was a lot of rejection I had to go through. There was a lot of hurdles, so I had to, you know, just really sort of be strong and be focused and keep my eyes on the creative goal. So I think that, yeah, we need to address this, and obviously I'm a woman of colour and an established artist, so probably, like, yeah, tick all of those boxes, which make it quite difficult to, I think, which have made it difficult to establish, but also to maintain. So, yeah, I just think that I was really, really lucky to get that initial support from non-governmental organisations, but I think it is getting better, and you also have a lot more places like the Brit School, which is where I did drama. So there are other places, and I think that there could be a lot more done to show kids who go to state schools how to access alternative places to learn an instrument. But yeah, so I've just released my debut solo record, which actually Dan from the Noisettes helped me create as well. So it's not like the solo record in that sort of sense, but yeah, it's my first big musical outing on my own. I feel like I'm at my creative peak, but I've struggled to find, I think, the creativity that I've needed from the industry to help support me. So yeah, it's weird. Currently, I'm actually technically unpublished, but yeah, I'm a very positive and optimistic person. So hopefully, I can bring something great and something dynamic to the conversation and support other emerging artists that are coming up by sharing my story and the new music. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you very much.
Trying to sort of squeeze it in.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Shingy, for that contribution.
You're welcome.
And also the work you're doing across the industry, that ambassadorial role that you're playing, I think is really, really important, and you're a fantastic role model for anyone wanting to start and be a music creator, and and we're really grateful for you sparing your time with us today. I'm going to pick up a couple of points from some of the contributions of the panel before we open it up to the floor. And the first is to start with Deborah. So I talked about you know, the hubs being a bit patchy, or some of the problems in sort of state education. UK Music has just completed a 6-month review of the music scene in Greater Manchester for the Mayor, Andy Burnham, which will be launching, I think, in a week or two's time. And there's a whole bunch of recommendations in that report, drawing on our members, including the MPA. But from your experience in Manchester with that fantastic global music heritage, where in your experience are the roadblocks for kind of emerging artists, and what do you think in kind of practical terms could be some of the changes that could be introduced to get rid of those roadblocks?
I think that's a good question. I think it's quite a lot of what you were talking about, actually. And one of the things that came through was your resilience, and I just think that is pretty amazing.
Thank you.
But I do think the resilience thing is really important. And I think, so talking about the curriculum and education and learning, I think that it's those kind of broader skills that sometimes aren't taught at that sort of curriculum level. And I think it's that skill, you know, of the DIY musician, the person that has to kind of do just about everything from, you know, creating their own music to setting up their own website and, you know, putting themselves out online, etc., etc. It's a huge kind of role, as well as being an artist, an instrumentalist, and you've got to build a freelance and portfolio career. And I think the conversations I've been having within Manchester have been very much about how can we skill up young people to really embrace that. And it's not just within music, it's as you say, right across the creative sector. How can we skill those young people up? How can we reach out to them? How can we make people excited, actually, about taking the risk, which it is a risk to lots of young people, especially young people in economically difficult situations, to go down that route? And more importantly, how can we convince, you know, parents and carers and people that are their role models that that's the kind of route that they could take, so that we can basically, I suppose, give oxygen to some of that amazing talent that's out there. There are loads and loads of things that have come through. I mean, the whole thing you were talking about before about rehearsal spaces, opportunities for, I think, talent in the north in particular can sometimes be restricted, and that might be because, well, we said it so many times, people say it so many times, but because of that industry, the bigger part of the industry being based in London. So building up that infrastructure even more, and thinking a big part as well of what I think Manchester's thinking about is not just opportunities nationally, but also opportunities internationally, so that it's that kind of, it's not just that you create something in Manchester and then you go down to London. It's that you create something in Manchester and you tour it internationally, or you take those bigger steps. So it's those kinds of resilience, business skills, creative approaches, I think, to working as a musician, as a curator, or indeed, you know, to working right across the industry they're really important. One of the big things we've been focusing on is gender inequality, and that in itself is very apparent in the north. I think out of people registered as composers and songwriters in the north, only 2% of those registered ones in the north are women. So there's a huge gap there, I think, in terms of really trying to develop and grow that gender equality, as well as, of course, lots of other areas around equal access and opportunity. Stop there.
Well, thank you for those comments. It slightly reminded me of when we had a series of fringe meetings at all the party conferences, the political conferences last year around music and education, and UK Music's chairman, Andy Heath, who also runs Beggars Music Publishing, one of the comments that he made direct to the minister was about, look, he said, the music business in the UK will be fine. He said, but music making in the UK will not be fine if we allow this to continue. Thank you for your remarks there. I'm going to now turn to Sharon. And one of the things when I was an MP that we'd, I think, rightly be criticised for when we go around and meet teachers and visit local schools, and they say, you know, the problem is everybody thinks they're an expert on education because they went to school. So in the spirit of that, you were a music teacher. If you were the education secretary for a day or perhaps a week, you know, what would be the first thing that you would do to change things?
I think that's a great question as well. I think it's lovely to have the focus on creativity here today. Sometimes in education, when you're on the chalk face, you deal with data, you deal with the everyday occurrences, and there's just a lack of time for teachers to do that. As a head of music, there'd be rehearsals going on in the morning, at lunchtime and after school. So to give teachers more time to do the things, to nurture that talent is really important to me.
Do you think, in terms of, we talked about the inspection regime, which is something that UK Music have been campaigning on as well, but in terms of teacher training, particularly for, say, primary school teachers, there's no reason why, you know, they would have a particular background in music. Do you think we could make improvements to the PGCE for, say, primary school teachers to give them more of an understanding about the power and the importance of music?
Very much so. For primary school teaching, they just dip into music. There is not a sustained involvement in that at all, and we work as part of Leicestershire Music Hub with primary school teachers, and we offer support for them, which is really key to spotting that talent and ensuring that creative culture is developed at an early age. There is no quick fix to this whole situation. It's catching children at an early age, at Key Stage 2, where at the age of about 8 or 9, children get to learn an instrument as a whole class. So what a fantastic opportunity for children across the country to do that, but what happens after that? And that's a real focus for us as a music hub, is to catch that talent and make sure that they have routes for progression, that they continue into secondary schools as well, and keep them engaged. Because at some stage, about when students go to secondary school, music isn't that cool anymore. And there's a bit of a lull in why children drop out of music. So I think it's our job as educators to ensure that that talent is still there and we keep that sustained interest with young people that we work with.
I think that's a really, really good point. And I often think in terms of the things that I've done in my career up to now. I was a self-taught musician, so I got a guitar when I was 12 and I learnt to play that, and really it was at that moment that kind of something just triggered in me. And although, you know, I played and was an amateur musician, perhaps very amateur, in terms of my personal self-confidence and engagement, you know, it really was the kind of key for me, and it was the reason why, you know, I went to school. I was one of the sort of guitar nerds that hung around the music room because, you know, then I could teach myself to play the piano or teach myself to play drums or the bass, and you thought you might meet a girl, you know, swapping REM tapes in 1991. So music has a lot to answer for, and although it never gave me a career, it gave me the confidence to achieve well and to pursue other things in other parts of my career. And I think that is so true for so many young people out there. Now, Kevin, you're also a former teacher. When you look back at Labour's time in government, you know, and you're thinking about if Labour win the election and you'll be a minister at DCMS, you know, reflecting on that period in government, what were the things that you thought you did well, but what are the things also you look back and you think, you know, we should have done more of this, or, you know, I thought we made a mistake here, we missed a trick there. Have you got any of those reflections?
Yes, I am a former teacher. I didn't teach music. I taught economics and history, and in fact I was going around some theatres in the West End this morning with one of my former pupils who I taught A-level history to, who's now the Conservative leader of Westminster City Council. So I didn't do a very good job, I'm afraid, as a as a teacher. But no, I'm very proud of what she's achieved, even if I don't agree with her politics. But and I think what you just said, Michael, about, and what everyone's really saying about those other soft skills they're sometimes referred to that you can get through getting involved in music. I mean, we you know, what do we need? What skills do you need in life if you're going to get on and get a job and do well? Not everyone's going to be a successful, professional musician, but to be able to stand up in front of people and express yourself, to be able to be articulate, to be able to look people in the eye, all those sorts of things are really going to be important to you. To have confidence in yourself are going to be important to you in whatever career you undertake. And that's why I think it is so short-sighted to ignore the importance of all of that, even if we're not talking about, you know, a pipeline for everyone to a professional career. And people can get huge enjoyment right throughout their life from music, from playing and listening to music. But to take Michael's point, in government, I suppose we did do some quite good things in relation to, I felt, in relation to music education, but probably should have been bolder about it, I think is the truth. There was quite a good initiative in the mid-2000s called the Music Manifesto, which some people in this room might remember, which was all about trying to lift the offer in schools on around music education and to give more opportunities. And there was quite a significant investment in that time in musical instruments. And I noticed, for example, in some of the reports there are around this subject, that there's an emphasis put on we need to get more musical instruments into school. I think that's right, but it's no good if you just buy some cheap Chinese clarinets and the plastic parts inside them break within 2 minutes, and then they get put in the music cupboard and never get taken out ever again. So if you are going to do it, I think it needs. I think the mistake we may have made sometimes as a government is that we thought that if we put a chunk of money with an announcement, and if we said, and we've provided X thousand instruments, that was the job done, and that isn't the job done. And I think, you know, professionals on the front line will tell you it actually requires much more of making sure that the accountability measures that are there in place for schools encourage them to do this sort of thing, as well as providing resources and good quality instruments and tuition and so on. So I think my day one thing, if you like, would be to try to quickly flip the mindset to make sure that schools understand that unless they do this, then they're not going to be rated outstanding, and that's what's going to appear in the inspection report. But that needs to be followed up by the right sort of investment and making sure schools are actually following the national curriculum, which is not required, astonishingly, in over half of secondary schools in England these days. But that they should be following the national curriculum and teaching creative subjects, including music.
Thank you, Kevin. And a couple of questions for Shingi, really. Do you think it's harder now for aspiring artists, and also what would be the one piece of advice that you would give any young person out there thinking about going into music and having a career in music?
That's a great question. I think that it's a lot more open than like when I went into it sort of 10, 12 years ago, which is a really good thing. I think there's a lot more types of opportunities in terms of, the way that people can get into the music industry and the way that people can promote themselves, which is great. But I think there's still a lot to be done at the kind of monitoring how the mainstream industry at large looks after and treats artists, not just at entry level, but also how it supports and how careers can be sustainable, because otherwise a lot of people fall off, and it's people's lives, and they put their heart and they put their soul into everything that they're creating. But yeah, so I guess in terms of advice, that resilience, thank you for saying that, I definitely would recommend to, just be strong and to try and not take too much criticism too personally, and channel your bad experiences into something good, into something creative, recycle it into art, make music and be honest, and make music that connects people rather than I think most music actually is what I love about it is it has this amazing ability to connect people, and I think most artists, we prefer the idea of kicking down walls than helping the powers that be reinforce the walls. So I think it's our job as artists to make people feel liberated, to allow people to feel things. And I think even if you get music lessons in your formative years, that can give you a sense of empathy later on in life. It can enhance your communicational skills and your empathy for others as well. So it's all connected, and that's why I like what you said about what learning music can give you, even if you don't choose music as a career. So I've just tried to put lots of things into those two questions you asked.
That was a great answer.
Thank you.
We've got about 10 minutes or so left, so I'm going to just open it up to the floor and take a couple of questions. If you can say your name and who you're representing, and then ask a question, and if you want to direct it to a particular member of the panel in particular, say that as well, please. So we'll start with this gentleman here.
Hi, thanks very much for your comments. My name is Matt Anderson. I'm a songwriter and composer and Academy member of the Ivors Academy. But in my former life, I was a community musician up in Nottingham. The climate for access to music and music education since Labour lost power has been decimated by a lack of funding and by curriculum restrictions. And it seems that everywhere you look, there's action that needs to be taken. And I wondered if the panel might consider advising the MPA and also the Ivors Academy on what would be the three most important practical things to do in the next year to try and reverse some of that decimation.
Okay, that's a good question. I'm going to take them in threes, if I may. Someone else want to come in? It's going to be hard for me to take them in threes if only one person puts their hand up. I've kind of just seen the flaw in my plan here. Right, we're going to stick with one question, I think. I was desperate for the reception to start. So, would you like to come in?
I would. I think us being here today and having the spotlight on music education is a huge step in the right direction. I think it's great that we can talk about this, but it's the start of a very long journey. And I think if we all pull together and partners for music hubs all work together to this, it can go in some way in shedding more a positive light on this rather than a negative light, which often we see in the media. So great that we're all here to start on this journey, and hopefully, if we're all working together, we'll pull through it.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think, three most important things. That's a hard question, isn't it? Because there's so much, really. But I kind of think, the things that we've been talking about actually really feel like if we could, not just talk about them, but really put them into action in a kind of strategic way, whether it's at government level or at local level or, all the different kinds of levels we can actually act on things. I think things will change, and I agree, it's a slow burn. It's not something that we're going to move to really quickly. But I think one of the really important things is that relatable curriculum, because I think your point about at secondary school level, young people actually moving away from music and not feeling that it is an important subject for them for whatever reason is something that we need to, I guess, interrogate a bit and really start to think more carefully about what a curriculum would look like that truly kind of inspired the young people that we're kind of connecting to. I think that's the biggest thing for me.
Thank you. Kevin?
I think that actually, it's a very good question. What could the MPA do? What could the Ivors Academy do? One thing that has vastly improved in recent years is the industry's ability to talk to policymakers. And, Michael mentioned the length of time which I've taken an interest in music industry issues, which goes back since I was elected in 2001. And there's been a transformation through the creation of things like UK Music, which acts as an umbrella in the last 10 years in the industry's ability to talk to policymakers, both the opposition in our case and also to government. And my experience as a government minister is that whatever the industry is, whether it's the music industry, the car industry, whatever it is, as a minister, you're not really interested in the wiring, to be quite honest. You should hide the wiring. You should be going to government and saying, this is what we want, and we're all agreed on it. Now, I know how hard that is in the music industry because there are different perspectives, and the Musicians' Union might have a different view, from the BPI on certain subjects, but there are things that everybody agrees on. I think this is something that pretty much everybody in the industry really agrees on, whether they're publishers, record companies, the MU, all the other parts of the industry. So that's the first part. Do that. Now, UK Music is doing that, and lots of people are doing it. Double down on doing that with government. I think largely the argument has been won. The problem is that there's a blockage inside government in the education department, not so much in DCMS, in the culture department, but in the education department, through this very blinkered, narrow perspective on what constitutes a good school and a good education. And there are particular individual ministers who take that view, and they unfortunately have the kind of veto on this policy within government. Now, the obvious conclusion I would say to that is get rid of the minister or get rid of the government, but that's not entirely in my hands. But keep plugging away at it, because I think the argument is being won. And what happens in education is, as anyone who's actively involved in it knows, the pendulum does swing back and forth from different views. And I feel the pendulum is swinging in the direction of understanding that without a real emphasis on creativity and music education, there will be a deficit, and it has an impact on the long term on people's lives.
Chingy.
I was going to say, actually, as a proud member of BASCA, you do great. Sorry, of course we've rebranded. My bad. We've rebranded. Okay, so I think that sometimes we can't expect the government and to do everything, and sometimes more often than not, schools and formal institutions will fail. And I think that there's a lot more funding that can go into community, alternative, creative, educational spaces. The work that Second Wave does in Lewisham, the work that MIDI Music does. I'm sure there are so many youth arts centres across England that could give up-and-coming music creators an alternative place to get musical education as well. So I think that those places could really, really do with a lot of help, because they're often there to pick up the pieces where the schools fail.
Thank you. And just to perhaps remind some people in the audience, in terms of the campaigning that we've done with the MPA and UK Music, we've established a number of themes that we've taken to government. So we had a meeting recently that was hosted by the DCMS minister, but jointly with an education minister, which was a huge breakthrough in terms of just getting that direct access. If you want my honest opinion as to where I think the Department of Education is at the moment, I think they've got a problem of perception, not of policy. Now we've, as an industry, have got to make sure that they keep having a PR problem, because we've got to keep that issue alive and we've got to keep battering, but we have got to show them that there is actually a problem with parts of the policy, and there's just no getting away from that. So some of the themes that we've focused on, the first is we've said there should be a universal access guarantee, that every child from every background should have access to music, and we should just establish that right at the beginning and stick to it. We've also talked about improving the inspection regime, as Kevin alluded to. Also, a broad-based curriculum is really important to get away from this kind of counterproductive, narrow focus that exists at the moment. We talked about the independent review of the music education hubs. Also, again, as Kevin said, recognizing the additional benefits of music and education, whether it's pupil well-being, creative expression, building self-esteem and confidence. You know, these are all really, really important to a child's education. To promote careers in the music industry, and not just creators, across the industry in production, promotion, publishing, agents, engineers, management, all of that side is really, really important too. And there really are two opportunities for us. I know parts of the discussion have been a little bleak for this time of day, but the government is planning to refresh, as they call it, interesting choice of word, but refresh the national plan for education. So that gives us an opportunity to really put our arguments as an industry front and centre. And also, there's going to be a comprehensive spending review where the government will set the spending priorities for the coming period. And there is a bit more fiscal headroom than there's been perhaps for a number of years. And again, that gives us an opportunity. And I think in really calling for greater funding in our schools and for music and education, we've got to constantly make the case for the benefits of this that this industry provides to the economy. And that was a point when I was at the Creative Industries Council last week. That was the plea made actually by Jeremy Wright, who's the Secretary of State for DCMS. And he said, you know, your arguments about the contribution that, say, music makes or the creative industries makes to the country, to the economy, the phrase he used, he said, they are not well understood. He said, you know, in the rest of Whitehall and Westminster. So when you see UK Music or the MPA repeating these themes, it's really, really important that we take that message to government to show the benefits and then show the changes that we want to introduce. Is there anyone who would like to come in? There's a lady over there, and then the gentleman at the front. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Williams, CEO of Impel. It's really on the back of the comment that you just made in terms of contribution to the economy. I think it's really important that students, pupils, young people can see that they could have a career, whether they're creators or anything else. And in order to be able to see that they can have a career, there needs to be a music industry that creates a really diversified set of opportunities. And that really means small payments up to really, really high-earning artists. I was at an event last couple of weeks ago, and Diane Warren, you know, the very famous, amazing songwriter, was giving a keynote. And I asked her at the end, when in the question session, what advice would you give to publishers to bring on amazing songwriters? And she said, pay them. So I kind of think that that actually encapsulates something really important here, that as an industry, when asking ourselves, what can we do? Well, what we can do is make sure that payments get back really fast and payments get back really accurately, and that the smaller payments get back too, so that people can start to see that there is a sort of progression, that you could be doing something that you don't have to be the pop star. You know, there's lots of ways that you can earn a living from that. That would create pressure from on government from a variety of sources, including from pupils themselves, because they would really want it. And I know I'm only addressing the commercial aspect, but I think it's very important, and that's something that we as an industry can really make a contribution to.
Thank you. The gentleman at the front there, and then we've got the gentleman just at the back on the left-hand side, my left-hand side.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Richard King, Faber Music, and we've been publishing educational music for 40-odd years and seen many cycles through that time, ups and downs. And to date, until the last 6 or 7 years, they've always bounced back as the government, whichever one has been in power, has done U-turn after U-turn, suddenly realising, oh yeah, music is important after all for all the subjects. So it goes around in circles. But there's an immense frustration right now because this is a systemic decline. I don't want to be too depressing about it, but it's true. What's happening is it's now filtered back into training colleges, and you're not getting the talent coming through at the teaching level either, for the first time in my experience as a professional publisher. And this is deeply, deeply worrying. Now, the frustration comes from hearing what you've just said, Michael, which is absolutely true. A lot of coordinated stuff has happened in this industry now for a number of years, thanks largely to UK Music and to us all getting behind. And we understand the point about you don't show the wiring, absolutely. And we are, generally speaking, with one voice, not only the publishing industry, but the record industry, the whole lot. Fantastic. We know this is what's needed. We've been doing it strongly and powerfully, backed up by study after study after study, both here and internationally, that shows how valuable music is for those 3 R's, for the other subjects. Yet, despite all of this government, and I'm not being party political, the people who are in power right now are frankly completely ignoring it. And the refresh says it all. We don't need a refresh, we need a complete change, because it's not enough, and it hasn't happened, and it isn't likely to happen, and all the time the clock is ticking away because we are just not getting that talent through that's going to actually inspire, and that's what's needed, inspire the next generation of youngsters into taking music seriously, wanting to do it, so that the wonderful things that you have said that are done in addition are indeed in addition. They're the things that are the great things on top of a fantastic solid base. So my question is, yeah, we know what we're doing. It's hard to know what more we could do, but there must be other things that we could do. Should we, for example, be commissioning some sort of very comprehensive professional report that pulls everything together in a format that the government understands? For example, just off the top of my head, or is there something else that we can do that gets all this stuff into one place so that we can actually make an incredibly powerful case that this just has to change? I mean, there's so much resting on it.
Thank you. The gentleman just at the far end there. And just on that, so UK Music with the MPA produced a report that you can see on our website about the talent pipeline, where we addressed a lot of these issues in relation to music and education. But equally at the end of last year, we produced our diversity report. I can see Nat, our head of research, did a fantastic job. That showed the industry's made some good progress, but has got a hell of a lot more work to do. So my kind of answer to your question really is we've got to keep plugging away, and as well as the kind of big things like money and a plan and all of that, don't be afraid to get into the weeds of some specific proposal. This government is not going to move away from the EBAC. Are they going to transform funding in state schools, in the next couple of years? Probably not. But, could we interest them in a proposal for an enhanced and expanded rehearsal space network that UK Music run? Definitely. I think we're on the verge of making progress there. Could we make changes to teacher training or to the inspection regime? Some of these things may seem like little changes, but actually, cumulatively, it could have a really transformative impact. So don't be afraid to keep plugging away. Sorry, gentleman over there.
Oh yeah, hi. Yeah, just as an alternative viewpoint, haven't the panel refused to show any or much link between formal school music education and professional artistic music success? And the only successful artist that the MPA could find hasn't had any formal musical education. And isn't it a fact that most artists that are successful have had to work long and hard for years, and any lack of success is because they're competing with 200,000 releases per week on Spotify, millions per year basically, and has got nothing to do with sexism or racism. And don't artists need to stop being divisive by claiming discrimination and just be realistic about their abilities to be successful in an incredibly competitive environment?
Thank you. I mean, I agree we should be realistic, but I also think we should be really ambitious. We shouldn't just settle for where we are now. I think that's really important as well. And if we are not ambitious for our industry, then how would we expect the government to share in that? Got one last contribution from the floor, and then I'm going to invite the panel just to quickly summarise. We've got a couple of minutes left.
Hello, yeah, I'm Claire Epson from Management Dade, and also She Said So. I think a couple of you, Shingi and also Deborah, you've made a point about role models. I think this is a huge thing, and I know I love the conversation and the power that some of the bodies here have in terms of changing policy, but I think also at a sort of more individual level we can go and speak, at our schools that we went to, and also show the sort of capacity for other jobs in the music industry that sometimes schools don't have, and sort of the dropping out at secondary schools and the interest in music. It's kind of not just playing the piano that's also interesting, but can we go and be there as individual role models for women, girls, women of colour, who don't think that they have that opportunity ahead of them?
Thank you for that. I'm just going to ask the panel for their kind of final thoughts before we finish this session, and a big thank you on behalf of all of you to the panel for sparing their time today and to being part of this fantastic discussion hosted here by the MPA. Chingy, why don't you go first?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I've had a really, I actually wouldn't change anything in terms of, my experiences, because ultimately they've made me the person that I am today, and they are character building, and at the end of the day, I'm here to make music for everybody. I think that I agree with you in saying that we can do better, and with regards to the comment about there not being, any racism or sexism, I mean, even just looking at this room, I think we can do better. So yeah, it's got to be at all levels, not just the artists. Yeah.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you also for having me along. This is the most exciting thing that's happened to me in politics since my band was on the same bill as the Noisettes on one occasion, which Shingy and I were talking about earlier on a boat for the BPI summer party. So thank you very much for that. I suppose what I'd like to say, two things very quickly without repeating everything. There is, the schools minister who has been at the department since 2010 with a very short break. Along there is a guy called Nick Gibb, and without personalising it too much, his view is that education should largely consist of children sitting at desks, if they're boys, preferably wearing short trousers, copying down, learning their timetables and reciting them, and copying down the names of the kings and queens of England from a chalkboard. I'm parodying slightly, but what I was trying to say earlier on, there is a blockage in government, and what Richard was saying earlier on, I understand the frustration because all that evidence has been piled on, has been put to government, and that blinkered view remains. I think the reason I thought there was a possibility of change, I think maybe there will be some change to come, even if it's not a general election within government in the coming months, that might be helpful and give a new opportunity to make that argument. And on the issue of diversity and so on, I think actually, just sitting here, I think we need to do more in government in relation to using fiscal measures like taxation sometimes to encourage diversity. So there's a great sort of campaign called Key Change, which you've heard about, probably to get more female artists represented at music festivals and so on. Maybe we should offer rate relief to music festivals, but you don't get it unless you meet an equality standard. And that's the sort of thing I think that government can do in public policy that will help drive behaviour change.
Thank you, Kevin. Deborah.
Yeah, really interesting points that people were making, and I kind of share the frustration, and I want to give a call out to She Said So, because I know they do an amazing, a lot of work through their network, but it's also an example really of, I guess, that importance of working locally and also working through the international networks that you have too, that really do make a difference. I think through our Both Sides Now programme, we've been working with the Greater Manchester kind of local authority, and they've been, developing with us a manifesto. And so I think there's work that can happen on the ground. I think the whole thing about going in, working with young people, being that role model, taking that step to be out there is really important for artists and for the industry generally, and for the industry to be felt, I think. I think sometimes, I know a lot of Music Education Hub, or I'm on a lot of Music Education Hub's strategic panels, and there's really very rarely any industry representation on those panels. There's really very rarely people saying the things that you've just been saying, for instance, suggesting about the investment from the industry. There's not those partnerships that are really kind of, that's not as visceral as they could be, I think. And I think the work that you're doing, the work that Youth Music is doing, and the work that a lot of people in this room have been doing is great, and we can work towards it. But I do think it's about getting out there and making that really kind of local difference as well as kind of relying on the kind of the strategic change makers.
Thank you. Final word, Sharon.
Thank you. I think for me, being on the floor with children and young people, it's all about that moment where the clarinet player gets that melody right, where that drummer plays that rhythm correctly. I was at a concert last night, a choir concert, and a little girl came off stage and she said, "That was the best moment of my life." And it's those moments that make us smile, and it's that talent and that engagement and that enthusiasm for music that I think is so important to recognise and capture. So for me, that's at the heart of what we do to nurture that talent.
Well, I think that's a really excellent way to end our session here. I want to thank the panellists once again, thank all of you for being here, and thank you to the MPA for hosting this discussion. The final thing I'd just like to say is, the MPA do a fantastic job. They're a really, really strong voice, and we've seen it in this important area of music and education, how they have driven that agenda. They're a fantastic member of UK music, so keep supporting the MPA and keep supporting UK music in this and the other campaigns on behalf of this fantastic industry. So thank you again to the panel. And I think it's now time for the drinks. Nearly. Go on, Paul.
Thank you so much for sharing that insightful discussion with us. And you're absolutely right. We need to be talking more about this, and we will continue to do that. A huge thanks to all of you for investing your afternoons with us for the MPA AGM. It's been a thrill to talk with you, and we hope to talk with you more upstairs for a drink throughout the course of this evening. So we're going up to the Battle Bridge room now for drinks. Please do come with us, but if you've got coats or bags, remember to leave them downstairs, because that's where we are being hosted this evening in terms of your belongings. But come upstairs, enjoy the evening, and thank you very much for attending today's AGM.